I never thought that the happiest day of my life could turn into a real nightmare. I was standing at the altar, my heart pounding, not only from the anxiety of marrying Emma, but also from a growing sense that something was wrong. The guests murmured among themselves, the sound of conversation echoing through the walls of the church, while I stared incessantly at the door through which Emma was to enter. Time seemed to drag on. Every minute that passed was like an eternity. My hands were sweating, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't help but stare at the clock. Where was she? Had something terrible happened? I began to feel helpless and desperate. My best man, Tom, tried to reassure me. "She'll show up, Ethan. She must have been late with her makeup or something." But makeup doesn't take hours, I thought. The sun was already beginning to set, and the church, once full of laughter and expectation, was now overtaken by an uncomfortable silence. People began to leave, one by one, muttering apologies and pitying glances in my direction. That's when my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "She will not come. Forget Emma." I felt a chill run down my spine. I showed the message to Tom, who immediately became alert. "That's not normal, Ethan. We need to find out what happened." With a heavy heart, I left the church and began to look for Emma everywhere she could be. I went to our apartment, to her parents' and house, to the cafe where we used to meet. I asked friends, acquaintances, but no one knew anything. It was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth. By this time, despair had already turned into panic. I couldn't think of anything else but finding her. The words of the message echoed in my mind, creating a whirlwind of doubts and fears. Who sent it? And why? Was Emma in danger? While driving through the streets of Boston, my phone rang again. This time it was Emma's mother. "Ethan, did she show up?" Her voice was shaky, laden with worry. "No, not yet. I'm looking for her." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Please let me know if you hear anything," she asked before hanging up. I began to review every moment of the past few weeks, trying to remember if there was anything that could have indicated that this would happen. Emma was happy, or at least she seemed to be. There was no sign that anything was wrong, or was there? And I just didn't notice. I drove to the park where we used to walk on weekends. I sat down on one of the benches and put my head in my hands. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I closed my eyes, trying to find some clarity amid the chaos my mind had become. "Sorry, are you okay?" A female voice took me out of my thoughts. I opened my eyes and saw a middle-aged woman looking at me with concern. "Yes, only, I'm just going through a hard time," I replied, trying to smile, but knowing that my face probably showed otherwise. She nodded, understanding. "Everything will be fine. Sometimes things happen for a reason we don't understand at the time." I thanked her and she went on her way, but her words kept reverberating in my mind. I needed to believe that somehow everything would work out. I started walking through the park, lost in thought. Every corner, every path reminded me of Emma. It was as if her presence was everywhere, but at the same time, she was inaccessible. My phone rang again, but this time it was a familiar number. It was Tom. "Ethan, I have an idea. Let's meet at the bar where we usually go. Maybe we can think better together," he suggested. I agreed and drove there, trying to hold out hope that we would find some clue. When I arrived, Tom was already there, with 2 beers on the table. "Here, you'll need it," he said, pushing one of the bottles in my direction. I accepted and took a sip, feeling the cold liquid relieve some of the accumulated tension. "So what are we going to do?" I asked, my voice sounding more desperate than I'd like. Tom looked at me, his eyes reflecting the determination I was beginning to lose. "Let's start from the beginning. Someone sent that message. We need to figure out who and why." We spent hours arguing, trying to piece together the puzzle that seemed increasingly complex. We listed everyone who might have some reason to want to stop our marriage, but none of the names made sense. Emma had no enemies, at least not that I knew of. "Maybe it's someone from her job," Tom suggested. "Do you know if she had any problems there?" I shook my head. Emma never mentioned anything significant. But then again, how could I be sure? Our relationship has always been based on trust, and I never felt the need to question his professional life. "Let's do the following," Tom continued. "Tomorrow, let's go to her office. We can talk to some people and see if we can figure something out. I agreed, knowing it was our best chance to get some response. When I left the bar, it was already dark. The streets of Boston were quiet, but to me, the night seemed darker than ever. I drove back home, every mile a struggle against tiredness and frustration. Upon entering the apartment, everything seemed empty and lifeless. Every corner, every object reminded me of Emma. I sat on the couch holding my phone, waiting for it to ring with some news, any news. But the silence was absolute. I closed my eyes, hoping that somehow sleep would bring me temporary relief from the anguish I felt. But I knew that true peace would only come when I found Emma and knew she was okay. The next morning, I woke up with my mind still clouded by lack of sleep, but determined to move forward with our investigation. I met Tom at the entrance to Emma's office. The building was imposing, with its glass walls reflecting the morning sun. We walked in and went straight to the reception. "Good morning. We're here to talk about Emma. She did not appear at the wedding yesterday and we are very worried," I explained to the receptionist. She looked at us with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Emma? She didn't show up for work today either. I'll call the manager." As we waited, I looked around, trying to find something that might give us a clue. It was then that I saw a picture of Emma on one of the walls, smiling next to her colleagues. My heart ached to see that smile, so far away now. The manager, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, led us into his room. "I am aware of Emma's disappearance," he began. "She is an exemplary employee, and we are all very concerned. Yesterday, she was perfectly normal, with no sign that anything was wrong. Did she mention something about someone bothering her? Some strange situation?" I asked, trying to stay calm. The manager shook his head. "No, nothing. But you should know that she was working on an important project, a large contract. Maybe there is something related to this." We thanked him and left the room, but this new information only added more questions. What could have been in this project that made it disappear? And who sent that message? Tom suggested we talk to some of Emma's colleagues. We meet Sarah, one of her closest friends at work. "Emma didn't mention anything about problems, but she was more reserved in recent weeks," she said. "I thought it was just the stress of marriage." We continued to talk to other people, but no one seemed to know anything concrete. The feeling of powerlessness began to intensify. Every clue led us to a dead end, and Emma was still missing. "We need a new approach," Tom said, as we walked back to the car. "Maybe we should check her social media, see if there's anything we might have missed." I agreed, even if it meant invading your privacy. We had no choice. We spent the afternoon combing through every post, every comment. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I found a private message from one David. The name was unfamiliar and the message was vague, but it seemed friendly. "Emma, we need to talk. It's urgent." The date was a few weeks ago. "Who is this David?" I asked, more to myself. The morning was cold and gray, perfectly reflecting my state of mind. After what seemed like an eternity of searching for Emma to no avail, I decided I needed to dig deeper. Couldn't come to terms with the fact that she just disappeared on our wedding day, without leaving any trace. The anonymous message I received said to forget it, but how could I? She was the love of my life. I decided to start by investigating what she had done in the weeks before the wedding. "I've scoured all your social networks, read and reread our messages, and even checked your cell phone call logs." It was then that I came across something strange. Several calls and messages to an unknown number. I did not recognize the name associated with the number, David. Who was he and why was Emma in contact with him? My head was 1,000. I needed answers, so I started asking Emma's friends and family. I gathered them at her parents' and house, a place that had always brought me comfort, but now seemed fraught with uncertainty. Emma's mother, always so welcoming, offered me a cup of tea, but I was more interested in answers than in any attempt to ease the tension. "Does anyone here know who David is?" I asked, trying to hide the desperation in my voice. The confused looks of those present were enough to make me realize that no one there seemed to know anything. Emma's father, a man of few words, just shook his head negatively. Her friends, who have always been so close, also seemed to have no idea who this mysterious man could be. "I don't know of any David," Emma's best friend Sarah said in a tone of voice that mixed worry and confusion. "We always talk about everything. If she was seeing anyone or had any problems, she would have definitely told me." But Emma hadn't counted. The only thing clear was that she was in frequent contact with this David in the weeks leading up to our wedding. I decided I needed to investigate further on my own. It was then that, in a last attempt to find some clue, I returned to Emma's apartment. I went through every corner, every drawer, every box, and it was in one of those boxes that I found what seemed to be an answer. A photo of Emma and David together in a cafe. They were smiling, they looked intimate, but that didn't make sense. Why wouldn't she tell me about him? With the photo in hand, I went back to Emma's parents. I showed it to her mother, who picked it up with trembling hands and wide eyes. "I've never seen this man before," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Frustration began to take hold of me. How could a man be so present in Emma's life without anyone knowing? I decided that I needed to find David and get answers directly from him. The photo gave me a clue. The cafe where they were looked familiar, a place where Emma and I used to go. Maybe someone out there knew something. I went to the cafe with the photo in hand, trying not to attract too much attention. I showed the image to the barista, who finally seemed to recognize the faces. "Yeah, they've been here a few times," he said with a curious look, "but I haven't seen them for a few weeks." "Do you know who he is?" I asked, pointing to David. "Sorry, I don't know. They seemed like friends, they came here, they talked a lot, but I never asked his name." That information intrigued me even more. What was Emma doing with this man, and why didn't she tell me? I decided I needed to get to the bottom of this story. I asked the barista to let me know if they came back to the cafe, and in the meantime I continued to investigate around the city. My search has taken me to places I never imagined going. Bars and clubs where Emma would never go alone, but where, according to some clues, David could be. At every turn, I felt that I was closer to the truth, but at the same time, every clue seemed to take me even further away from Emma. As the days went by, my mind filled with questions and suspicions. Who was David? What did he want with Emma? And above all, why did Emma disappear on our wedding day without giving any explanation? It was on one of those lonely nights, while reviewing all the clues in my small apartment, that I got a call from the barista at the cafe. He told me that he had seen David again, but that Emma was not with him this time. I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Finally, I would have the chance to confront David. The next day, I went to the cafe at the appointed time and waited. When David finally walked in, my heart skipped a beat. He was tall, with a presence that did not go unnoticed. When our eyes met, he seemed surprised, but did not hesitate to come to me. "Can I help?" he asked in a calm, controlled voice. "Who are you?" I asked directly, bluntly. "And what do you want with Emma?" David seemed to ponder for a moment before answering. "I am a friend. What about you?" "I'm Ethan, her fiancé, or at least I was. She disappeared on our wedding day and I need answers." David sighed deeply, as if waiting for that conversation. "I know how hard this must be for you, Ethan, but I can't tell you everything here. We need to talk in a more reserved place." Reluctantly, but without many options, I agreed. We left the cafe and went to a nearby park, where we could talk without being heard. It was a quiet, almost empty place, and the cool breeze seemed to calm the tension a little. "Emma came to me because she was in trouble," David began, looking directly into my eyes. "She was being threatened by someone who wanted to use her to get to you." "That doesn't make sense," I said, shaking my head. "Why didn't she tell me anything?" "She was trying to protect you," David continued, "and also your family. The threats were serious and she didn't know what to do. I was just a friend who tried to help her find a solution." David's words began to make sense, but there was still a lot I didn't understand. "Why didn't she tell me anything? Why did you run away on our wedding day?" "Because the threats have intensified," he explained, "and she thought the only way to keep you safe was to disappear." I felt a mixture of relief and pain. Relief to know Emma didn't cheat on me, but pain for all the suffering she was going through alone. "Do you know where she is now?" I asked, waiting for the answer. David hesitated for a moment before answering. "I know. But before we take you to her, you need to understand that we are dealing with something very dangerous. If you really want to help her, You need to be prepared to face it together with her. I looked at David, feeling the gravity of the situation. I'll do whatever it takes, just take me to her. David nodded, and we started walking toward what I hoped would be the end of this nightmare. Every step I took, I felt my heart beat harder. I was about to meet Emma again, but I also knew that I was entering a world of dangers and secrets that I never imagined existed. When we finally reached the destination, a small apartment in a remote neighborhood, David stopped at the door and turned to me. I'm going to give you a moment with her, but remember, this is not the end. It's just the beginning of something we need to solve together. I nodded and went into the apartment. There she was, Emma, in David's arms. She was visibly shaken at the sight of me, her eyes filled with tears, but there was also a glimmer of hope. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I'm sorry." "Emma," I said, approaching her. "I need to know what happened. I need to understand." She took a deep breath and looked at David, who nodded, giving her courage to continue. "I was trying to protect you," she began. "I never meant to hurt you, but the threats were real and I didn't know what to do. David was the only one who helped me find a way out." As she spoke, the truth finally began to unfold before me. Emma hadn't betrayed me. She was trying to save us. And now, together, we would need to face the danger that still surrounded us. The morning after discovering the photo of Emma and David together, I could barely sleep. My mind was in a whirlwind of unanswered questions, and the image of the two of them in the cafe repeated incessantly in my head. I decided that I needed to find David and find out once and for all what was happening. After a few hours of investigation, I was able to track down an address where he could be. It was a small apartment in a remote neighborhood of Boston, a place I never imagined Emma could be. When I arrived at the scene, my heart was pounding. The building was old, with peeling walls and an appearance that conveyed an air of abandonment. I climbed the creaking stairs to the third floor and stopped in front of door number 307. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down my nerves, and knocked on the door. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, the door slowly opened. There she was, Emma, in David's arms. My heart broke in half. She was visibly shaken at the sight of me, and her eyes instantly filled with tears. "Ethan, please let me explain," she begged, her voice shaking. I was torn between anger and a desperate need to understand. "Emma, what's going on? Why did you do this to me?" My voice came out harder than I intended. David stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Ethan, I know this sounds terrible, but you need to hear what Emma has to say. She didn't do it because she wanted to." I looked at Emma, searching for some truth in her eyes. "All right, Emma, speak up. I'm listening." She took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. "Ethan, I was being threatened. Someone forced me to disappear to protect you and your family. I had no choice. My mind was spinning with this new information. Who? Who threatened you? Why? And why didn't you come to me? We could have faced this together." Emma swallowed hard before continuing. "It was my boss, Richard. He was engaged in illegal activities. When I found out, he started threatening me. He said if I didn't disappear, he'd go after you and your family. I couldn't let that happen." David, who until then had been silent, decided to intervene. "Richard is a dangerous man. He has contacts in places you can't even imagine. When Emma tried to move away, he threatened not only her, but also you and your family." My mind was spinning with the new information. Richard had always seemed like a normal boss to me, maybe a little demanding, but I never imagined that he would be involved in something so dirty. "And what is this evidence?" I asked, trying to understand the seriousness of the situation. Emma lowered her head, shame evident on her face. "He has forged emails, documents that link me to illegal transactions, things I've never done, but that can easily incriminate me." I felt a lump form in my stomach. "So basically we are dealing with a powerful blackmailer who will not hesitate to destroy lives to protect himself." David nodded. "Exactly, and that's why we need to be careful. If we want to solve this, we have to act intelligently." I ran my hand through my hair, trying to think clearly. "Okay, so our first step is to find out more about Richard's illegal activities. We need hard evidence that can really incriminate him." Emma looked at me, her face a mixture of hope and fear. Are you really going to help me, Ethan? Of course I will, Emma. No matter what happened, I can't leave you alone in this, but we need to be quick and discreet. We decided it would be best to start by investigating Richard's office. Emma still had access to the building, and we could try to find something that would link him directly to the crimes. That night, we got together to plan every detail. David, can you help us get into the building without being seen? I asked, aware that he was also risking a lot by getting involved. He nodded. Yes, I have some contacts who can help us with this. But we have to be quick. Richard is usually out late, but we can't be silly. Emma looked nervous but determined. I know where he keeps some confidential documents. If we can get something from there, we might have a chance. The next night, we headed to Richard's office. The building was almost empty, only a few security guards patrolling the corridors. David managed to get us a visitor's pass, and we got in without arousing suspicion. Emma guided us to Richard's room, using an access card she still had. He keeps everything in a safe behind the painting, he whispered, pointing to a huge work of art hanging on the wall. David started working on the safe while I kept watch at the door. My heart was racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Finally, we heard a click, and the safe opened. Inside, we find a series of documents, hard drives, and a laptop. Emma quickly began rummaging through the material, looking for something that could help us. Here, she said, holding up a set of emails and contracts. This should be enough to at least start an investigation. We packed everything in a backpack and left the office as quietly as we entered. In the car, I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. We did it. Now we need to analyze all this and take it to the police. David looked at me seriously. We need to be careful. Richard has eyes and ears everywhere. If he suspects something, he can try to destroy that evidence, or worse, he can come after us. I nodded, aware of the danger we were in. Let's go to my house. There we will be able to calmly analyze this and decide on the next step. When we got home, we spread the documents on the kitchen table. Emma began reading the emails while David reviewed the contracts. I focused on the laptop, trying to access any information that might be stored there. Look at this, Emma said suddenly, holding an email. Richard was coordinating a series of money transfers to offshore accounts, and he used my name in several of these transactions. David frowned. This is serious. If we can trace these transfers, we can prove that you were unaware of them. I kept rummaging through the laptop until I found an encrypted folder. That must be important, I muttered, trying to crack the password. After a few attempts, I was able to access the folder and found a series of videos and recordings of conversations. These recordings may be what we need, he said, showing the screen to Emma and David. Richard talking about his plans and mentioning his contacts. This is pure gold. Emma looked relieved, but there was still a hint of fear in her eyes. We need to get this to the police as soon as possible. Before Richard realizes something is wrong, we agree to act immediately. David kept watch while Emma and I went to the police station. We hand over everything to the responsible detective, explaining the situation in detail. This is enough to start an investigation, the detective said, analyzing the documents. We will need more information, but this is already a good start. Keep an eye out and keep us informed. We left the police station with a sense of hope, but we knew the battle was far from over. We needed to be careful and make sure Richard didn't find out about our steps. In the days that followed, we kept a low profile, waiting for any news from the police. The tension was palpable, but we knew we were doing the right thing. Emma and I talked more, trying to rebuild trust that had been shaken. I'm sorry about all this, Ethan, she said one night as we sat in the living room. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to protect you. I held his hand, feeling the sincerity in his words. I know, Emma, and I'm also sorry that I didn't realize what was happening earlier. Let's get out of this together, okay? She nodded, a shy smile on her lips. Together. Finally, we got a call from the police station. The detective informed us that they had obtained additional evidence and that an operation was being planned to arrest Richard. It was the beginning of the end for him, and Emma's chance to clear her name. But the journey was far from over. We knew there were still a lot of unanswered questions and that we needed to be prepared for anything. Love and determination united us, and we were ready to face whatever lay ahead, together. The tension in the air was palpable, as Emma, David, and I gathered in David's small apartment. The dim light from the lampshade cast shadows on the walls, reflecting the gloomy mood of the situation. Emma was sitting next to me on the couch, visibly nervous, while David paced back and forth, clearly trying to process everything we had found out about Richard. "We need a plan," David said, finally stopping walking. "Something that allows us to gather enough evidence to incriminate Richard without putting Emma in danger again." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the hands clasped in her lap. "We have to be careful. Richard is cunning and has many influential contacts. We can't let him see what we're doing." I thought for a moment, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. What if we used Richard's own trust against him? He still thinks he has control over you, Emma. Maybe we can take advantage of that. David looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Emma could pretend that she is still under his control," I explained. "She can approach Richard again and earn his trust, while we work behind the scenes to collect the necessary evidence." It was a risky idea, but it seemed to be the only way to catch Richard off guard. Emma bit her lip, pondering the proposal. What if he suspects? What if I end up putting myself in even more danger? "We won't let that happen," I promised, holding his hand. "We will be watching every move. Let's not leave her alone in this." David agreed. "I can keep an eye on Richard and make sure he doesn't try anything. I know some contacts in the police who can help us discreetly." With the plan in place, we started working on the details. Emma would contact Richard, claiming that she was ready to return and do whatever he demanded. Meanwhile, David and I were infiltrating Richard's business, trying to find anything we could use as evidence. The following days were filled with tension and uncertainty. Emma managed to arrange a meeting with Richard in his office. Anxiety was visible on her face as she prepared to leave. "Are you sure you can do this?" I asked, trying to hide my own concern. "I have to do it," she replied with determination. "I cannot continue to live in fear, and I can't let Richard ruin any more lives." I hugged her quickly before she left. "Be careful, we'll be around." David and I discreetly followed Emma to the building where Richard worked. He walked into the office with a confident smile, but I knew inside she was terrified. We wait outside, prepared to act at any sign of trouble. Inside the office, Richard looked surprised but pleased to see Emma. "So, you finally decided to go back," he said, leaning back in the leather chair. "Wise decision." Emma kept her expression steady. "I had no choice, Richard. You left me with no alternatives." Richard laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You always had a choice, Emma. I was just afraid of making the wrong choice." As the conversation continued, I felt my stomach turn. We needed something concrete, some proof that Richard was involved in illegal activities. David, by my side, was in constant communication with his contacts in the police, ready to act as soon as we had something. Suddenly, we heard a noise coming from inside the office. Emma was being more assertive in her questions, trying to get valuable information. "And what do you intend to do now, Richard? Continue with your threats and blackmail?" Richard frowned, clearly annoyed. "You're not in a position to ask questions, Emma. Remember who is in control here." At this time, David received a message from one of his contacts. "We have something," he said, showing the message to me. It was a document detailing suspicious financial transactions linked to Richard, something we could use to incriminate him. "Let's go in," he said, his heart racing. "We have what we need." We walk into Richard's office abruptly, catching him by surprise. He stood up quickly, the expression of shock and anger evident on his face. "What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted. "It's over, Richard," David said, holding the document. "We have enough evidence to hand you over to the police." Richard looked at Emma, hatred in his eyes. "You'll regret it, Emma, I promise." Before he could react, officers entered the office, handcuffing him. Richard continued to shout threats as he was led away, but finally, we knew he was out of action. With Richard behind bars, I thought the nightmare was over, but then he made one last revelation, one that left us stunned. "Do you think this will end me? Someone very close to you, Ethan, is involved in this. Good luck finding out who." Richard's words echoed in my mind as he was led away by the cops. Anyone close to me? Who could it be? I looked at Emma and David, both looking equally confused and worried. "Let's find out who it is," Emma said, holding my hand. "Together we will unravel all this." I nodded, determined to find out the truth. We had already been through so much together. and this would be just another proof of our resilience. Of one thing I was sure: no matter what happened, we would not let anyone else separate us. The morning after Richard's arrest, he still felt a whirlwind of emotions. The discovery that someone close to me was involved in the criminal scheme was a blow I was not prepared to face. Emma and I woke up holding each other, a quiet comfort that seemed necessary after everything we'd been through. Yet the tension was palpable. I felt that there were still missing pieces to this dark puzzle. As we sipped coffee in the kitchen, Emma looked me in the eye, reflecting my own uneasiness. "Ethan, who do you think Richard meant by someone close to you?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. I sighed deeply, trying to organize my thoughts. "I don't know, Emma. It could be anyone. Richard was clever, manipulative. We need to find out who it is before anything else happens." We decided that the best way to start would be to talk to the police. They could have more information about what Richard revealed before he was arrested. At the police station, we were met by Detective Anderson, a tired-looking man, but with keen eyes. "Good morning, Ethan, Emma. I imagine you're here because of Richard's statement," he said, gesturing for us to sit down. "Exactly, Detective," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Who is this person close to me who was involved with Richard?" Detective Anderson looked at us for a moment before speaking. "Richard mentioned a name before he was taken away. Michael. He said that Michael was deeply involved, and that blackmail was the way to keep him under control." My heart almost stopped. Michael, my brother. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Detective, are you sure?" "Michael is my brother. He would never do something like that." Anderson nodded, understanding. "I know it's hard, Ethan, but we need to talk to him. It may be that he was forced to do things that he did not want." Emma shook my hand, a silent gesture of support. "Let's talk to him, Ethan. We need to hear his side of the story." We returned home, and each step seemed heavier than the previous one. Emma and I decided that it would be best to confront Michael in a neutral setting, so I called him and asked him to meet us at the park where we used to play when we were kids. When Michael arrived, he looked worried, as if he knew something was wrong. "Ethan, Emma, what's going on? Why this urgency?" I took a deep breath and got straight to the point. "Michael, Richard was arrested and he mentioned your name. He said you were involved in his scheme. I need to know the truth." Michael turned pale, and for a moment I thought he was going to faint. "Ethan, I can explain." "Then explain!" My voice came out louder than I intended, but I couldn't control the anger and disappointment. Michael began to speak, his voice trembling. "Richard blackmailed me. He found out that I was involved in some questionable activities at the company where I work. He threatened to expose everything if I didn't help him with what he needed. I didn't know how to get out of this, Ethan. I was scared." Emma intervened, her voice soft but firm. "Michael, why didn't you come to us? We could have helped." Michael shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if I did what Richard wanted, he would leave me alone, and no one else would be harmed." I looked at my brother, feeling a mixture of compassion and anger. "Michael, do you understand what you did? You put us all in danger. Emma had to disappear on our wedding day because of this." "I know, Ethan, and I'm sorry. There's not a day that I don't regret getting involved with Richard. I just wanted to protect my family," he said, sobbing. I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. "Michael, we need to fix this. You will turn yourself into the police and tell everything you know. It's the only way to clear his name and make sure Richard can't hurt us anymore." Michael nodded, resigned. "I'll do it, Ethan. I'll tell you everything." We went back to the police station with Michael. Detective Anderson welcomed us again and listened attentively to my brother's confession. It was painful to hear all the details, but I knew it was necessary. Michael revealed all the illegal activities that Richard was involved in and how he was forced to participate. When we finished, Detective Anderson assured us that the investigation would continue and that Michael would be in protective custody while he cooperated with the police. We left the police station with a slightly lighter weight on our shoulders, but there was still a lot to be solved. In the following days, Emma and I tried to resume our lives. Reconciliation was not easy. There were many unresolved feelings and wounds that needed to heal, but the love we felt for each other was strong enough to overcome everything. One night, while we were sitting on the couch, Emma held my hand and looked into my eyes. "Ethan, we've been through so much together. but I believe that all this has only made us stronger. I want to start over. Together. I shook her hand, feeling a wave of relief and love. Me too, Emma. Let's leave the past behind and build a better future. We decided that we needed a fresh start, away from all the painful memories. We planned a trip to a quiet place where we could reconnect and rediscover our happiness. We chose a small seaside town in Maine, a place we had always dreamed of visiting. During the trip, we talked about everything that had happened, laughing and crying together. Each day felt like a new opportunity for healing and renewal. We walked along the beach holding hands, feeling the sea breeze and the warmth of the sun on our faces. It was as if we were leaving behind all the shadows of the past. One evening, as we watched the sunset, Emma turned to me, a soft smile on her face. "Ethan, I'm ready to move on. Are we going to set a new date for our wedding?" I smile at her, feeling genuine happiness for the first time in a long time. "Come on, Emma. This time nothing will stop us." We returned to Boston with a new purpose. We started planning our wedding again, this time with the certainty that we were ready to face any challenge together. The preparations were full of joy and expectation, and every detail seemed perfect. On the big day, seeing her walking down the aisle, I felt my heart fill with love and gratitude. Emma's disappearance from our first marriage had been a litmus test, but now we were stronger and more united than ever. With Michael by my side as my best man, I felt like we were finally all at peace. He had done his part, cooperating with justice and redeeming himself. The family was reunited again, and that was all that mattered. Emma made it down the aisle, and when our eyes met, I knew we were ready to begin this new journey together. The celebrant's words seemed to float around us, and when we finally said yes, I felt that all the weight of the past had been left behind. With a kiss, we seal our commitment to eternal love. The applause and smiles of our friends and family surrounded us, and I knew that despite all the difficulties, we had succeeded. We were ready to face the future together, stronger and more united than we could ever have imagined. Life was finally getting back on track, and as I held Emma's hand, I knew that no matter what the future held for us, we would be together, ready for any challenge. After all, our love had proved stronger than any obstacle.